Good evening, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Erin Purdy, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Briscoe Center. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to our program tonight with Terry McDonell and Don Carleton in celebration of McDonell's newest book, Irma. It's also an opportunity for us to publicly thank Terry for placing his papers at the center and to learn more about his storied editorial career. After the program concludes, you are all invited to join us for a reception and book signing in the lobby. You'll also have a chance to visit our exhibitions, which include selections from Terry McDonell's papers in our Weatherby Gallery. You'll also enjoy selections from the papers of Richard Benvenisti, who was just here a few weeks ago. Hopefully some of you had a chance to join us for that program. And our major exhibition, Through Her Lens, the photojournalism of Diana Walker, which is a retrospective exhibit of iconic photos from the Pioneering Photographers Archive. Now, let me introduce tonight's speakers. If you have read any major magazines in the past 50 years, you've undoubtedly encountered the editorial work of Terry McDonell. He started his career in the early 1970s as a freelance photographer and reporter for Associated Press and LA Magazine. He then served as associate editor of San Francisco and City magazines, that's the city of San Francisco, and helped launch Outside magazine in the late 70s out of the West Coast office of Rolling Stone. In 1979, he conceptualized, launched, and served as the editor-in-chief of Rocky Mountain, the first regional magazine for the Mountain West. McDonell then served as managing editor of Rolling Stone, where he doubled the magazine's circulation. He went on to edit numerous award-winning publications, including Newsweek, Smart, Esquire, Sports Illustrated, Men's Journal, and Us Weekly. And I believe the Fashion Police actually started under his leadership. Is that right?
That's true.
In 2012, he retired from Time Inc. as senior editorial advisor after editing Sports Illustrated Group's magazines and websites for 10 years. That same year, he was inducted into the American Society of Magazine Editors Hall of Fame. McDonell went on to establish the website LitHub, dedicated to literary life and culture. He is an emeritus member and former president of the board of directors for the Paris Review, and he served on the board of overseers for the Columbia Journalism Review. As I mentioned, he donated his professional archive to the Briscoe Center, and he serves as a member of our Ambassadors Council. McDonell is also a novelist and poet who has written and produced for film and television, including Miami Vice and China Beach. His debut novel, California Bloodstock, was published in 1980. In 2016, he published his memoir, The Accidental Life, which has been called a movable feast for the second half of the 20th century. Tonight, we'll hear more from McDonell about his new book, Irma. Kirkus Reviews calls Irma a rich and bittersweet portrait of a mother and son, spanning miles, decades, and complex emotions. Terry was 4 months old when his father, who was serving as a fighter pilot, died during World War II. And 25-year-old schoolteacher Irma was left to raise her young son alone. The book is about Irma and her son, but it's also about fatherhood and how Irma's example influenced McDonell's own parenting. In another context, McDonell has written, "Culture is memory. We know who we are by telling each other about the way we live. And the stories we write down are more important than the stories we tell each other." Terry will be interviewed by Dr. Don Carleton, the founding executive director of the Briscoe Center. Dr. Carleton is an historian and the author of 14 books, as well as the executive producer of 2 PBS documentaries. He holds the university's J.R. Parton Chair in the Archives of American History. Please join me in welcoming Terry McDonell and Don Carleton.
Thank you. It's good.
Well, Terry, I'm going to cheat. I've got some notes here. There's so many questions that I need to ask you, and I hope you've got a lot of answers for them. So we'll try that. But I'm going to look at my notes here as we go through this. As Erin Purdy has demonstrated in her introduction, my good friend Terry McDonell is a true polymath. During his outstanding career, Terry's made his mark as a journalist, editor, print and website designer and developer, novelist, screenwriter, poet, photographer, and publishing executive and consultant. And I'm sure I've left out 5 or 6 other things, but time is, a problem. Now, I first met Terry, I first met Terry a few years ago at a lunch at Michael's restaurant in Manhattan, which had been hosted, or was hosted, by our mutual friend, magazine publisher and native Texan Joe Armstrong. Let's hear it for Joe. Anyway, that luncheon eventually led to Terry's generous donation of his papers to the Briscoe Center. And after donating his papers, as Aaron pointed out, he's agreed to serve on the Center's Advisory Council, and he remains a member today, although we now call the council the Ambassadors Council. Terry's papers are a very valuable resource for original research on several topics related to American media history, especially that of the magazine industry during the last years of its golden era before it was profoundly transformed by the internet. His collection, which measures nearly 80 linear feet, includes files documenting Terry's close working relationship with numerous writers, literary agents, photographers, magazine staff members, and many others. His notable correspondence includes Hunter Thompson, Jim Harrison, George Plimpton, Jan Winter, P.J. O'Rourke, Gay Talese, and Frank DeFord. That list only scratches the surface, by the way. His papers also include manuscripts of his poetry, books, movie scripts, as well as screenplays written for television programs. His memoir, The Accidental Life, was published in 2016, and now we have another memoir, Irma, which you can see here, The Education of a Mother's Son. I love the title, especially the subtitle. Published by Harper's. I think it came out in April or May of this year. Terry, thanks again for your very generous donation of your papers to the Briscoe Center and all the help you've given us over time, and your participation in our Ambassadors Council. We really deeply appreciate it. So before we talk about your latest book, when you talk about a book named Irma after his mother, sometimes I'll have to say, make sure I'm just saying the book, so you don't think I'm talking about his mother, okay? He will talk about his mother. I will not talk about his mother. I want to ask you a few questions related to your professional career which relate also somewhat to the papers that you've donated to us. We have, and by the way, as Aaron pointed out, when we have a reception, I hope you all go to the very end of the hallway down here toward our reading room. And Sarah Soner, our magical, talented curator of exhibits, has put up a wonderful exhibit of Terry's papers. But anyway, I'll invite you to go see the exhibit, and you can, at that time. Anyway, one of the early resumes that we have on display in the exhibit identifies you're self-identifying in the resume, as a photographer and graphic designer. This is early in your career. So what led you to switch from photography and graphic designer to reporter and writer?
The joke always was that it was not unusual for journalists to do that when I did it. And you switched because photographers always had to drive. It was, very loose time. You could pick up a camera and go to Vietnam, and suddenly you were a journalist. In my case, it was the Middle East. But there were so many long-haired, crazy people running around the world with Nikons around their neck for probably 15 years that fueled a whole generation of publications and journalists. That's my generation. And a whole bunch of us moved from film, or some of it was video stuff, to becoming editors. Editors made more money and had steady work. It was also, if you had not done that kind of work before, really fun to understand what it was like to put things together with all these pieces. It's like I'd gone to art school, and I had picked up a camera, and it was part of all of that. And then I liked it, and I liked the life of it. But then editing opened a whole other conceptual door, and I was able to really play around with all kinds of things, especially ideas, and especially visual ideas, even typography, which I came to love.
You mentioned that editors make more money and have steadier work than photographers, which is, I think, very true. But I've heard that someone actually inspired you to be an editor, that you had models, role models.
Yeah, there was a guy named Bob Sherrill who was from Asheville, North Carolina, and he had been an editor, a young editor at Esquire, where he is credited with inventing dubious achievement awards. But Bob was a literary Southern man, and that whole tradition sort of lived under his hat. And when I had left the AP, I was maybe 24, and moved to Los Angeles. Didn't work for the AP anymore, wanted to do something more creative, and especially this sort of outlaw newspaper that was being started by people that had seriously good reputations in Los Angeles, and I was hired to do that, and he was the number 2 there. So he would, I would drive him around Southern California, and he would drink beer, and we would talk about how crazy Southern California was, and what was a story idea and what wasn't, and he started encouraging me that my ideas were interesting enough to him that I should be an editor. And his ideas were complicated and often dangerous.
And the rest is history, as they say. I mean, then came Newsweek, Rolling Stone, Esquire, Sports Illustrated, and that's just a few of the editing positions that he had. The leader as the editor. I'm going to skip around a little bit. I'm dying to ask you, how did you get involved in Miami Vice?
Oh, this is why. Yeah. So I was at Newsweek, and it was the exact anniversary, one of the anniversaries of this, specifically the fall of Saigon, where the helicopter leaves the roof and whatever. And we were naturally doing a commemorative of it, because commemoratives were what you did in those days to sort of goose your circulation a little bit. And in the course of that, I found a story, just going through old files in Newsweek, about how somebody had smuggled heroin out of Saigon in that last week in body bags. And I told this to a guy who I knew through a girlfriend who was working at Fox in L.A., and he said, "Oh, that's really something." I mean, and he said, "I got to call somebody." And the next thing, I got a call from Michael Mann, who was just then inventing Miami Vice, and he said, I'm in New York. We have breakfast tomorrow." So we had breakfast, and I explained what the story was. Just Jason gave him the clip, and he said, "You should write this." And I said, I've never done that before." He said, "That's not a problem. I will teach you." And he did, kind of, but it was pretty simple. A story, B story, C story. And his favorite thing that he taught me first was that at the end of each scene, he'd like to have what he called a percussive ending. And in our show, just the first one I used was Don Johnson, who is Sonny Crockett, who is in Vietnam, and he's very handsome. And he's you're not quite sure where he's on some kind of a ship, and everything's exploding, and there's a montage, and there's the helicopter lifting off the embassy, and somebody's pushing another one into the sea, and it's just this terrible thing. And then there's Don, and he opens the sea. So it's like a ship that's sinks, but it's a body bag he's opening. And then he just leans against the wall and slides down and sits there. Bang, go to black. That's a percussive ending of a sequence or an act or a movie.
And we've got
If you think about that, you'll start seeing them all the time.
in the exhibit that I want you to go look at after this is over, we've got a page or two of the script that he's talking about, his first script for Miami Vice. Now, Terry, you've worked, as I said earlier, with a number of celebrated writers. I'm going to ask you a tough question here. Which ones did you most enjoy working with? Did you have any favorites? I mean, working relationship, not necessarily writer. How well they wrote, but just enjoy.
Yeah,
working.
for sure. But I have three, and they were different. The most fun was Hunter Thompson, because that's all he ever wanted to do was have fun. He was always railing about the death of fun. Fun is over. We're doomed. There's no more fun. Let's have some of this. We played acid golf. It was all
Acid golf. Okay.
Yeah. Well, this brings up the other writer who was also very much fun, and that was George Plimpton, who would do anything for fun and turned it into the kind of a career that he ultimately invented for a bunch of other people doing participatory journalism. The acid came into play when George, who had started the Paris Review as well. Thank you. I have a bit of a throat thing. I get this snot. So distracting because
There's a full bottle, right?
that's about acid golf now.
There's more where that. There's more where that came from.
Hey, so George wants to interview Hunter for the Writers at Work. Very famous thing that the Paris Review does, and they're very valuable. So out we go to Woody Creek, Colorado, and I had already been working with Hunter a little bit, and so I'd softened this all up, but he was going to play the game he always played, which was, if we're going to do it, but not right now. We're going to do it later, or we're just going to. So maybe he's agreed to do this. So we get there and we go through what all the rules are going to be, who's going to tape what, and who's going to answer the questions, and is he going to get to read it, whatever. He says, yeah, it sounds great, but first, some golf. So we drive to the golf course. Aspen is a beautiful little course. It's about 5 o'clock. It's kind of closing. Hunter waves at the caretaker. And then we go where they have a special cart that is held in reserve for Hunter. In the cart there's a huge ice chest, and there's wild turkey, there's Hennessy, there's Jose Cuervo, there's a 6-pack of Mexican beer, there's a 6-pack of Rainier Ale. I remember he used to like to drink that, and also a shotgun in with the clubs.
Does everyone bring a shotgun when they go?
Yeah, he says, well, what's that for? He said, yeah, I'll find out later. So the three of us are going to play golf, and now remember, Hunter likes to slow things down, and then we're not going to do it yet. Say, okay, now we're going to play golf. But first, some acid. So he takes out these blotters that with the, one of those logos on it that is a little bit frightening, and says, "Here, stick out your tongues." So he did that to me, and George wouldn't do it. George said, "No, I'm playing golf." And Hunter said, "Okay," and took his too. So that's the three of us. Oh, and they, by the way, were great friends, and they had so much in common. They were both 6'3.5". They weighed the same. They were handsome. They'd both served the country in the Hunter in the Air Force. George as a tank commander. Anyway, many things. But and they were both good athletes. In this case, what we were going to do is we're going to play a game that Hunter had made up, whereby it's actually a variation on best ball. So you get eliminated if you're not closest to the pin or if you do not actually win the hole. And so we're going to play because of one hole. It's serious golf. And George, very good golfer. He wrote a book about it. It was called The Bogeyman. He's really a good golfer. It was like a par 3 over a lake. Puts the ball right there. I didn't embarrass myself. Made it to the green and that first thing. So we're both on, and Hunter and did it too. And so we're all playing golf, and two of us are high on acid. So it's like this is historical in some level. I think, I'm embarrassed to tell you, but I was thinking, this is going to make a really good thing for me to tell this story later about being with these two guys. Anyway, it got tenser when we got to the green ourselves because George and Hunter were very close, and George was George putted and he two putted, so he's in there. So Hunter is going to follow. I'm irrelevant. Hunter putts going for the whole thing, and it went across on the other side of the hole, way across. And he says, "God damn, horrible." Back around to make it to tie George. Remember, we had teed off over the lake. So Hunter's and tinkling in George's glass, and I heard that, stop that, trying to throw me off. And and then suddenly, one of the geese said something that geese say, like, honk. And Hunter said, "That does it." And he gets the shotgun, fires not at the geese, over the geese, for sure. And off the lake rose 250 beautiful white Canadian geese with me on acid. And Hunter, arguing with it, he, deserves to tell. And it's, anyway, and we went back and didn't do the interview for another 2 days.
A little different question, Terry. Although I may get the same kind of answer, I have an idea.
I'm sorry.
No. That's a great story.
I hadn't told it in a long time. Maybe sharper about that, Nick.
So what about writers that were difficult, that were a challenge?
Well,
as an editor,
most difficult was also the third of my three most fun writers.
Okay.
That was Jim Harrison. Who once told me, "You lynched my baby," because, unbeknownst to me, a copy editor had inserted a semicolon into one of his sentences. Lynched my baby. Jim was a poet and insisted that nobody edits poets. You don't edit me. It was like, I don't get edited. It's like, just won't work. It's like some little children are allergic to lima beans. It was like, Jim, you didn't edit. So you didn't, except you did later after thought he was finished and he never read anything a second time. So, you tricked him. But he would use the same word 3 times in a paragraph, which would drive me insane. And he would say he did it on purpose. But he didn't, I thought. But he was so gifted in his storytelling, and there's something about the way all of his work came together that it was really genius. And he deserves all of the praise. And,
I know you guys were very good, close friends.
The best thing was, though, we never talked about anything except what we were going to have for dinner. and then we would go out to dinner or we would eat. And he became the greatest of all anti-food critics. I was in the Super Bowl in Detroit, and I said, I've got to take some people out to dinner here, to some advertisers. Is there a good place to go in Detroit? He was from Michigan, and he knew Detroit, or so he said. He said, nah. He says, just go and get yourself some white bread and bologna and eat it in your hotel room with something good to read. Best place to eat in Detroit.
Well, I need to write that down the next time I'm in Detroit.
He had a 15-course meal that he wrote about in the New Yorker, about 8,000 words. It is extremely funny. Eat to live. And it was, I wanted him to write a column about his literary travels. He greatly enjoyed visiting the graves of dead poets. Spiritual treks, no doubt, for him. And I said, well, we'll write about your travels, your literary travels. And he said, no. He wanted to write about food, and it was going to be called The Raw and the Cooked, after the Levi Strauss, anthropology. And it turned out it was something he'd been thinking about for a long, long time. And he started and was this immediate success by bringing the raw and the cooked together, highbrow, lowbrow, whatever, the bologna sandwich. And he ultimately educated himself in the course of writing more of these things until he was really insufferable as an expert on everything to do with food.
I know.
I also paid him. Yeah. Helpful.
I know most writers and editors look at publishers as the people who make sure that they get a paycheck at the end of the month, okay? But paychecks are important, of course. So, but did you have any favorite publishers that you worked with or owners of magazines?
I started 2 magazines myself, and I liked that publisher best.
I like that publisher. Yeah, that was
me, but there's no meetings. Going to Sports Illustrated at the time I got there was like landing on this aircraft carrier in a great helicopter and having everybody salute you as soon as you got off. That was really fun. But it was sort of the beginning. I was sort of the last of a kind of an editor, I think, that enjoyed the kind of, drink carts and, $40,000 a year in veal piccata on your expense account. And we flew first class. It was obscene, actually, in some ways. It abused as it had been for so many years. And the people there thought they were entitled to it. And I think a swirling combination of all that ultimately brought that company into a different place, because people who were there never left, and they thought that they knew better than anybody. Otherwise, why would they be so rich? Anyway, that was winding down. That was one experience. But Rolling Stone was really fun too, because
I bet.
we did have the money to do the stories, what we wanted. But yeah.
Was that the favorite?
Swimsuit issues are no fun.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, how come?
Well, because it's tedious. I never went to those shoots, one time for a little while. And there's a backlash, for me anyway, unconscious to a degree, because everywhere I went as a Sports Illustrated, the editor of Sports Illustrated, people wanted to know about swimsuit models. Would you go to the shoots, get to meet them, whatever, even in China where they called it the bathroom issue as opposed to the swimsuit issue. We had them all over the world, and the women were lovely and heartbreakingly young, and I felt you had to protect them somehow. At the same time, my photographer has them sky humping rocks and these, wearing less and less. I worried about it so much that when the staff were really good people, but some of them were determined to somehow get this off the magazine. So they were organizing themselves for a boycott to have Sports Illustrated stop doing the swimsuit issue. Now, I took this very seriously. I thought, yeah, maybe. Now, never mind that it was like a $10 million business by itself, but we could get that somewhere else. We move swimsuit. It doesn't have to be Sports Illustrated quite so much. So I did a poll. Everybody at Sports Illustrated took this poll. It was, professionally done, and it was split. The results split in thirds. To the first third, it was obscene and disgusting and hypocritical and all of the bad things that the SI swimsuit issue actually is. To the second third, it was something. Well, if it's necessary, we can. I guess we'll keep doing it. It's okay, but I don't want to work on it. The third group thought that it was such a dumb question. They couldn't believe that I was naive enough to think that they would go for, me doing a poll to decide whether or not to keep the SI swimsuit issue alive. It became like a laughing matter to them. And that's the attitude that prevailed. Even the people who were really opposed to it wanted to shut it down, got a load of this, and they said, yeah, what an idiot. They're all pointing at me. It was my problem then.
Oh, that's a difficult situation to be in. That's right.
My predecessor, I believe, had been fired because in a meeting with the two men who hired me, suggested that Sports Illustrated might be better off without the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. I replaced him 2 months later.
Oh boy. Okay, you walked into that one. So, well, let's
I didn't know that at the time. I'm sorry.
Well, let's talk about your mother. Let's talk about the book, Irma. Why did you write this book?
I had a rap about that. I'll tell you what it is, and then I'll tell you why I sort of don't do it anymore. I would say, which is true, that when the previous book was reviewed, people would, usually with irony and sarcasm, say that it was good, but that I wasn't really in the book. You couldn't find him in there because he was somehow.
You're talking about the accidental
life. He was hiding something or not quite.
Yeah.
Wanting to be. So I thought, well, that's what I'll do. And my publisher thought that was a good idea. I'll just do more about my career within the context of what I had done before. So I started, and I couldn't figure out why everything felt so forced. I realized that I was like another old media guy telling the same old media stories about himself and other people in this crazy old wacky time. It seemed sort of bulbous and just somehow all wrong. And my agent, genius, said, well, that's because you don't understand what this book is really about. The most interesting person in these pages is by far your mother, not you. And I said, how do you know that? She said, what it is, you have more. So forget about talking about yourself. Talk about, tell stories about your mother and tell your life through what you learned from your mother. So that's what I did, and that's how the book came to be what it is. I don't use that in audiences anymore, explaining that's why I did it, because the New York Times writer, was truly pointed out that the book was still about me. It was like some sort of hypocritical thing that I was doing, but that allows me now to say it was really, the book became about memory and in different voices that I would assume as a little boy, as an old man, and in the middle I used the third person biographical. So I talked about me as him, which allowed me to say things about myself that would have either sounded, arrogant or stupid or, pretentious or whatever during that thing. And that sort of allowed me to pull all this together. And memory, because the more I started thinking about what had happened and this or that, whatever, it came back to me. More and more stories that were significant, memories that were significant to me in ways that I had not understood before. It was a kind of therapy, I guess. And there are studies about this that I became familiar with. And it's interesting. I promise you, if you do it, it will happen to you. You just follow one memory after another after another. You're driving across the country with your mother.
Well, I have to tell you, this you're in for a treat if you haven't read the book yet. You start out, as he said, and he starts out as a little boy, a boy's voice. And at the first sort of the reaction you have is, wait a minute, what's going on here? And he moves into the third, third person voice, first person. I found the approach, I caught on pretty quickly. I found the approach not only very interesting, but extremely appealing. I thought, gee, this is a good thing here. And I'll quote from the New York Times here. The New York Times reviewer wrote that, quote, that you came of age in the era of new journalism, and that your decision to change voices was a very new journalism choice. It's hard to know what to make of this, she said.
Yeah, that's the lovely Andrea Jacobs.
So, I have a couple other review quotes from reviews I want to trot by you too,
Sure.
Don't mind. So you were talking about the book started out being about you, and then you were convinced and persuaded that it should be about your mother, and then you took that whole middle track. So it says that the reviewer in the New York Times, the same person we just said.
Alexandra, actually, not Andrea.
That's good. Okay. The reviewer comments that the book still is about Terry McDonell, though you can feel him continually trying to steer it back to Irma like a car that's out of alignment.
Yeah.
What's your reaction? What's your reaction to that?
She's just a wonderful, wonderful person.
So we'll be on a roll here. A review in Esquire magazine states that your mastery of this story a child's story, which is what I find appealing, is something to behold. And she describes, or he describes, the memoir as, quote unquote, self-lacerating, unquote. How do you feel about that? Do you think it's self-lacerating?
No.
Why do you think he thinks it?
I don't know. I mean, I think the book is about masculinity. You know, the one thing that you can't talk about, especially if you're an old white guy, without all kinds of incoming. The Times, that woman, I think, or what everyone agreed, not just me, but she reviewed me as, magazine editor who had these jobs and had done these various things, and, so what? Was, that, but and that's all fine. I think it's a lacerating book, though, because of what it's about. It's about a single mother who, when everybody in World War II was celebrating the victory, she was grieving with a small child. She wasn't alone. There were a lot of these women, and the men who came back to them were not perfect. It was not the greatest generation necessarily. These women had a lot of trouble, and what they got was $12,000 and good luck. In my mother's case, we went to California, and we moved around a lot. But she wound up with the guy who was the worst of, if he were alive today, everything about him would be, as a 40-year-old man, would be unacceptable. He was racist, a liar, a cheat, a braggart. He was just everything, and he was violent. So, like so many single mothers, my mother dealt with that. And then, even though, I came to realize that her feminism was from some deeper strength, some sort of spiritualism that I get from women a lot, I think, or I always sort of felt, way before anybody taught. I once told her that I was telling her that Kay Graham, who I worked with, who ran the Newsweek Washington Post, and she wore their hair the same way. I said, yeah, you're the same age, and, you both lost a husband, but, you grew up on a farm that didn't have indoor plumbing, and she back and forth between these houses and whatever. And I said, and you wear this hair the same way. She said, I don't care about how we wear our hair. It would really be great if the Campbell Union High School district had a single woman principal among all their schools. So she identified with Kay Graham as a woman who was running something that she would want to, so she's a feminist. And that sort of hit me that I had not been thought about it that way. And that's the stuff that happens over and over in the book. And then she wins. Various moves and stuff that she did, she bought and sold some houses. She wound up living on a cliff in Northern California, looking out over a place called Pleasure Point. So, but it was a real rumble of a ride.
It's a very poignant story. But you note that, talking about your mother again, of course, do you note that Irma, when you were 8 years old, she brought home a copy of Life magazine, which featured on its cover Hemingway's story, The Old Man and the Sea. And that turns out to be an important moment for you after all these years. You want to explain that?
Yeah, there's a couple big hairpins in it, though.
Okay.
Here they come.
Yeah.
She told me, she said, "You're going to like this story," before she read it to me, and I did.
And you're 8 years old.
Yeah, but that's okay. Old Man and the Seas, it's good for children. It's a good story for anybody. And then as I got more interested in that, and in Ernest Hemingway, started reading it all. I didn't read it all when I was 8 years old, but the stuff stayed with me, and I became, pretty well informed about what his work was like. And I remember still being struck by, in The Old Man and the Sea, you'll recall, that the old man who will not give up, but loses, dreams at night of lions playing on the beach in Africa, which he visited as a young man. And I wanted to go and see, I wanted to dream of lions playing on the beach. And I'm just not 8 anymore, but we would still talk about things like what I was reading. And she said, "Well, yeah, you can do that too." In fact, the idea was that anything I read about, I could wind up doing or getting a piece of in some way. And then that went on like that with Hemingway, with this sort of constantly in my mind, because my mother, couldn't understand why she didn't go all in, say, "Yeah, read all of Ernest. It's going to be great." I realized, I'm not sure what it was, because in the end we didn't talk about it, but years later, she was gone, I was hired to write a mini-series off of A Movable Feast, Ernest's book about his youth in Paris. Marielle was going to direct. It was going to be, big deal. And in the course of that, I got to know her father, which was Ernest's oldest son, Jack Bumby, and I knew the family. And what I found out is that Ernest started those boys drinking when they were pre-teenagers. They would be drunk and hungover when they were 11. He took Jack to a whorehouse when Jack was 13. He bullied and railed and all of the things that he was famous for. Otherwise, but on and over and whatever his sons, probably the worst father I could have imagined to have for myself. Although you got to play with guns and you got to, use a lot of stuff with it. But what a terrible person he must have been. Sort of drunk on himself.
You have a riveting sentence in your book about how he wound up.
Well,
it's just a very quick little thing that I thought was powerful.
I'm not sure what you're...
The bathrobe.
Oh, yeah. Well, he died in his bathrobe in his river on the tile floor.
Yeah. Shotgun.
Boom. But
while in a bath, it's a kind of a stunning...
It was like
it kind of jumps out all of a sudden.
The depression that he suffered was another thing that was in the book. That's why I put that stuff in the book. Because, the depression and memory have a very interesting hide-and-seek game going on. I mean, we all know that the worst things are often the hardest to think about or remember, but they're also the most difficult things to completely forget. So we're all in this, rhapsody, depending on how we're doing ourselves, of those things playing in our emotion and our, and synapses. It's right on the border, actually physically on the border of depression.
This book is unsparing, and it'll grab you as you read through it. I'm going to go to also Will Hurst here a second. In his magazine, Alta, it's a California magazine, if any of you have had the good luck to see it, it's a wonderful magazine. At any rate, he observed, Will Hurst is a longtime friend of Terry's, and of course he's the chairman of the Hearst media empire. Anyway, he writes, "My guess is that McDonell's book became a voyage of discovery of his mother, but also a chance to unravel his own origins and impulses, a rethinking of his own life events from the changed viewpoint that comes with age. Tell me about your relationship with Will Hurst. I had one of the more delightful evenings, thanks to you, a few years ago at your birthday party in New York, and you saw to it that I sat next to Will Hurst, and it was absolutely delightful dinner. I found him incredibly charming and good-humored and everything. Tell us about your relationship with him.
Well, like you, he's a great deal smarter than me.
Oh.
He
says that they're all.
No, I don't. No, it's just when he was breaking out from his family to do something else, we wound up working together on Outside Magazine, and I think I became a friend from a different direction for him. So I was not in that 1% or whatever that world that he came from, and we became friends, and he too is interested in history and mental health, but he, like Cormac McCarthy in his late career, very, very interested in math and how that all works together, and physics. Will was a math major in college. He still goes to math dinners in France, whatever those are. But that all came together for me intellectually in the book, which I think is why he sort of jumped in there as if he was sort of on top of the thinking, which he kind of is. But that's in the book too, some sort of thinking about that, and that'll get you too if you follow, anything you follow down those rabbit holes of your own memory. How you everybody remembers how they learned something to do with numbers. Very crisp memories usually. That teacher, what the weather was like, how much fun it was.
Well, I'm sure, as most of you know, Will Hurst is William Randolph Hearst's grandson, and I'm not surprised he's interested in history a little bit.
Well, his family, he, for sure.
So this book is based on your memories, as all memoirs are, I suppose. So how did you reconstruct your childhood? What other sources did you use to craft this memoir? Some of us have trouble remembering what we had for breakfast yesterday. I mean, how did you do it?
Sometimes I looked at maps to make sure I was in the right place. Or we lived for a while in Orange, Texas. I didn't know where Orange, Texas.
Yeah, that amazed me when I saw it.
We moved after my father was killed, we moved from place to place to place where my mother could teach, because she had surprisingly been to college, and she had one of those certificates, is what they called them. But we always moved to a place that had a naval air station, which is what they called Navy air bases. And there was one in Orange, Texas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was. Yeah.
But like I'm saying is that if you think like I did this is a kind of technique. We drove across the country when I guess I was 4, and she had a brand new Ford convertible, and it was maroon, which was now my favorite color. No, maroon had not existed before. And we drove with the top down, and I started thinking about that, and I remembered that she put this suntan lotion all over us that you were working on our tans, and they could smell it, and then I would think, it'd be so hot. It would be like 90 degrees at the sundown, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, I remembered the Doris Day song, Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. It was her favorite song. I did not know that going in to write this. I didn't have a note somewhere. And then I remembered what she had told me. It was her favorite song because it was pretty and it was true at the same time. And that just hit me as something that was so like her that I got that. And then I would look for that again. And it was that kind of an exercise. I would try to remember, and then I could somehow. We went to a rodeo in Laramie, Wyoming.
Well, those are the kind of things. I mean, when I was working with Cronkite on his memoir, I would bring a box of photographs. Yeah. Because the way we did that is I pulled his story out of him. I mean, that's what he wanted me to do anyway. I think I did it, but who knows? But that's the same kind of thing. I mean, in other words, I'd pull a photograph out, and it would unlock or something that he would have never even thought of otherwise. Yeah. Did you? You looked at some photographs? Yeah, of course. Music, as you say, music will do the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
He liked Dixieland jazz, and I didn't, so we never talked about that. You also state, which is pretty much what you just said, that sourcing and attribution can be tricky in memoirs, depending on what the author actually remembers. Now, I've done a few. I've worked with people on their own, memoirs. Some of them I ghost wrote. Some of them I was as told to, others with. And I've had publishers tell me, one in particular, I remember an editor called me and said, now, how do we know this is true? How do we know this person's story is true? And I'd always have tell them what I told my graduate students when we were talking about oral history. It's not, don't worry about the facts. It may be true or it may not be true. But from a historian's point of view, it's a real key to look inside someone, their memoir. The facts are almost beside the point. And if you're doing a biography of Terry, for example, there's all kinds of sources for the facts. You can check all of that stuff. But the real Terry comes out in a memoir. And whether you're telling stories or not, whether they're accurate or not, I'm not accusing you of doing that. That's a really important thing. And that's the reason why we many times collect these papers, because they're insights into the inner workings of the person. Why is the state of California at the heart of this book?
God, because I grew up there, and it was just so complicated for a little boy. It was changing so fast, and I had so much problem with, I'm worried about my mother and my father. I'm growing up in the Santa Clara Valley, which is now Silicon Valley. I watched it, go from fruit trees to asphalt. I paid part of it myself. That transition has always struck me. I could never forget it. I remember everything about the natural world that my mother insisted that I'd learn. No, I knew the name of every tree, all the birds. It was a game. She would drive around in her car, and then I would say, well, that would be a eucalyptus tree, which is an easy one.
Well, I suppose obviously that's the connection. You have a strong connection to the natural world. I've noticed in your travels and Africa, safari trips, and so forth. And that's probably, I guess that's where that.
Well, I think we all do. And for me, when I would go to some place where I could look at animals, like in Africa, and it would just bring these other memories about a kudu on the hill, and I'm remembering, some person that I didn't treat quite as fairly as I wanted to. Out of nowhere, I would get that. I don't know how that, but anyway, it was pretty interesting. My mother had taught me. I had an insect collection. Very proud of it.
Insect collection.
Yeah, she made she made my killing jar for me. It was about looking. What you saw was not important as how you looked, and that allowed you to know more and use it. When I was very little, we just got to California. I fell out of a cherry tree, and I got caught on a twig going down, and big gash with a little boy and his arm. And we went to the emergency room, and she said, "You look at this now." And she said, "You don't want to look at this. It's not that bad. It's not great. But if you don't look at that, you're never going to understand what it was, and she might do it again." And, I remember that. I didn't do that again. It wasn't that bad. 16 stitches.
She's also the one that persuaded you to write a novel, right? Terry's written a novel, California Bloodstock. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, that's right.
Why did she do that? I mean, how did that happen?
I was working as a reporter early on in Los Angeles. That the startup that the Village Voice for the West. That's everybody was always trying to do. And I was complaining, and she said, "What are you doing? Why don't you do something else? Try something else." I said, "Like what?" She said, "Well, like those writers you always liked so much." I went, "Okay," although I was not confident.
Not confident.
That was
Yeah.
go very far. But then,
Well,
yeah.
Time for questions. Anyone have any questions to ask Terry? Aaron, you gonna come on now? Surely you've got a question or two here. Oh, we got a sound technical problem.
Thank you.
Anyone with a question?
No, we're not. We're gonna lock the door, and we're not gonna let anybody.
That's okay. That's okay. I find that sometimes that's the best.
I'll put Steve Aragon on the hot seat. Yes, yeah, there we go. Thank you, Steve.
I've been making a lot. Sure.
I have a kind of similar origin story. My father was also a fighter pilot and was killed before I was born.
Yep.
And I'm curious about a lot of things. We're very curious to read the book, but I wonder what you learned about him growing up from your mother. Did she speak to you about him, or was there that kind of World War II cone of silence that pertained to all the
there was
come back?
Yeah, there was that. There were two things. One is that because of that silence, I made up a story about him. I knew exactly what had happened. He had shot down thousands of Japanese Zeros before they got him, and he was a huge hero. And my mother let me go on believing that. It's not true. Years and years later, I found out that he was a pilot and he was a kind of a hero, but he was teaching, and he died in a plane crash in Norfolk, Virginia, where he was stationed. So, that, yeah. But the other thing that you just made me think about, Steve and I worked together so long ago, we can't even remember it. Really, it was one of the first stories I ever assigned, luckily to him. After this book came out, I started hearing from people about who had similar histories. There were a lot more than I ever expected. The most interesting one was from a guy named Greil Marcus. You may recall his name.
Yeah.
He's a great writer and journalist critic, and better than anyone on rock and roll music, I think. Anyway, he wrote to me that he had grown up like 20 miles from me. He remembered the hamburger place that I went to. He went to it too. He remembered the bar where my stepfather drank. So did his. We went to Berkeley, same year, freshman. Marcus McDonell, we were in the same line in registration. We didn't know each other until later, and we didn't put any of this together until this book. And then he told me his sort of version of this, which is really something. His father had been a naval officer also, and on a I think a cruiser, and had gone down in the Pacific in a storm, which was unusual. They don't just sink in typhoons. That's whatever, but no big deal. Everybody moves on. But after the war, there was an investigation into what had happened to that, and there was a report that the Navy filed, and it turned out that the ship was the basis for the film The Caine Mutiny, and his father was the executive officer, the basis for the hero of that movie. And Grill Marcus didn't hear that from anybody. He didn't know. He figured it out. You know, it came around. He was in his 30s by the time he knew that.
Wow. Thanks for that question, Steve. I'm going to buy you a drink outside when you. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, my
throat.
yeah.
But this may or may not have been during your tenure at Rolling Stone, but it has to do with the companion to Acid Golf, Hunter Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that various series of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas that was published there that made it more impactful was the Sparkman artwork that accompanied that. I was wondering how that association came together of the Sparkman artwork.
Yeah, Ralph Steadman. That started.
And that's it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's that's so crucial to all that stuff. Long before Rolling Stone, Hunter knew a great editor named Warren Hinkle, the guy with the patch over one eye who traveled with a beagle. And the joke about him was that he finally lost 20 pounds because he had quit drinking in cabs. This is Warren Hinkle, who had started Ramparts magazine, or took it over, and he allowed Hunter to go and write a story about the Kentucky Derby. Hunter was from Louisville. It was his he knew everything about that. And Warren was nervous that maybe it wouldn't be interesting enough, so he got this British illustrator, Ralph Steadman, and sent him to Louisville to meet Hunter. And something about Hunter explaining to Steadman what this was all about helped them both creatively, and they blossomed. And Ralph lived at a place in the west of England called Loose Court, which Hunter thought was good.
All right, that's going to be our last question because we don't have time for you to sign books here. We've persuaded Terry to sign his new book. So why don't we call it to move everyone into the reception and be sure and tell them that I bought Steve a drink. So thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you, Terry.
You, Don.